Hello, everyone, and happy Halloween. We just wanted to take a second and thank you for stopping by the channel. Halloween is our favorite time of the year, and we appreciate you spending yours with us too. We just wanted to let you know we've officially launched merch on our Printify store, which you can find linked below this video. If you like what you hear on this channel and want to support the work we do, this is the best way possible. Thanks again for stopping by and enjoy these truly terrifying Halloween horror stories. It all started as a stupid Halloween prank. We were the group of kids who thought we were too cool for trick-or-treating, but still wanted to stir up some trouble. You know the type. Bored. Too old for costumes, but not quite old enough for the real parties. We were just looking for a little fun. That night, we had been wandering around the neighborhood, picking out houses to mess with. It wasn't anything major, just knocking on doors of houses with the lights off and egging the ones where no one answered. Dumb stuff, but it felt thrilling at the time. We came across this old, run-down house at the edge of the neighborhood. The place looked abandoned. Dark windows, no decorations, no porch light. It seemed like the perfect target. Bet this guy's too cheap to buy candy. My friend Danny laughed. Let's give him a trick. We knocked on the door, calling out in that typical mocking tone. Hey, you in there? No treats? Guess we'll have to trick you. No response. That's when Danny, the one who always pushed things too far, pulled out an egg from his backpack. With a smirk, he hurled it at the front door. The splatter of the egg hitting the wood sent us into a fit of laughter. One by one, we emptied our egg cartons, coating the house with yolk and shells. But as we were getting ready to leave, Danny wasn't done yet. Nah, this isn't enough, he said, scanning the ground until he found a decent-sized rock. Without a second thought, he threw it at one of the dark windows. Crash! The sound of shattering glass echoed down the street. Our laughter died instantly, replaced by a sudden rush of panic. We weren't expecting it to break. And just as we were about to make a run for it, the front door swung open. There stood the homeowner, silhouetted by the dim light from inside. He wasn't just some old man coming out to yell at us. He was furious. His face was twisted in anger, and in his hands, he held a baseball bat. You think you can get away with this? He yelled, storming down the steps. We bolted. No one even said a word. We just ran, adrenaline kicking in as we dashed for the woods at the edge of the street. We figured once we were in the trees, he'd give up. No one would chase us in there, right? Wrong. As we weaved through the trees, we could hear him behind us, crashing through the underbrush, swinging the bat against tree trunks, his voice still ringing out. You won't get away from me. At first, we snickered to ourselves. He sounded ridiculous, like some bad movie villain. Danny, always cocky, even shouted back, Good luck catching us, old man. But the guy didn't stop. He kept coming. And the more we ran, the closer he seemed to get. Split up, I shouted, thinking we'd lose him if we spread out. We darted in different directions, hoping he'd get confused. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The man had caught Danny. We all froze, hiding behind the trees, watching in horror as the man raised the bat and slammed it into Danny's side. Danny screamed, dropping to the ground, clutching his ribs. The guy didn't stop. He grabbed Danny by the collar and started dragging him back toward the house. My heart pounded in my chest as we watched, too terrified to do anything. Help! Danny screamed, his voice echoing through the woods. None of us moved. We were too scared, too shocked. As soon as they disappeared back toward the house, I snapped out of it. We need to call the cops." We scrambled to get our phones out, our hands shaking as we dialed 911. When the cops arrived, we pointed them to the house, explaining everything in a jumble of fear and guilt. The officers didn't hesitate. They stormed the place. At first, the homeowner played it cool, acting like nothing had happened. He was calm, almost eerily so, claiming he didn't know what we were talking about. But then, we heard it. A faint voice calling out from inside the house. "Help." The officers rushed upstairs, and that's when they found Danny. He was tied up in an old coat closet, bloody and bruised, but still conscious. The cops arrested the man on the spot. Turns out he wasn't just some random angry guy. He was a convicted felon, recently out of prison for aggravated assault. We had messed with the wrong house that night, and Danny had nearly paid the price. Danny was taken to the hospital. Thankfully, he ended up being okay, just traumatized and sore for a long time. But that night haunted all of us. What started as a stupid prank turned into something we'd never forget. We learned a hard lesson that Halloween. Sometimes, tricks aren't just fun and games. Sometimes they come with real consequences. I'd been counting down to this Halloween party for weeks. Jenna, my best friend, and I had the perfect costumes planned. She was dressing up as an angel, and I was going to be the devil. A funny little play on opposites. And honestly, I was looking forward to the reactions. It was my first real college party, and coming from a strict household, I had never had the chance to let loose like this before. I was nervous, but excited. I had already decided that I was going to drink as much as I wanted. I mean, why not? I'd never really had the chance to do it at home, and tonight seemed like the perfect opportunity. We got to the party around 9, and the energy was everything I hoped for. The house was packed with people in costumes, music blaring, drinks flowing. Jenna and I got a ton of compliments on our contrasting outfits, and it felt good to finally be part of the college scene. We danced, played some drinking games, and before long, the alcohol started to hit me. Since I wasn't used to drinking, it didn't take much. 2 or 3 drinks in, and I was already feeling tipsy. I remember laughing a lot. Everything felt light and fun. But things started to blur after a few more drinks. I don't remember exactly how many I had, but it was enough that my vision went fuzzy, and the room seemed to tilt. Then, nothing, just blackness. I woke up with a splitting headache. My mouth was dry, and for a moment I had no idea where I was. The music from the party was still blaring outside, muffled through the walls, but I was alone in a dark room. The only light came from the flashes of colors spilling under the door. That's when I heard it. Heavy breathing. Slow, deep, almost labored breaths coming from the corner of the room. Panic hit me like a freight train. My heart started racing and I froze, too terrified to move or even look toward the sound. My mind raced. Who was in the room with me? Why hadn't I noticed them when I woke up? I laid perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the door, praying that someone would come in and save me. The breathing continued, steady and unnerving, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Finally, the door flung open. I jumped, letting out a small yelp, but relief flooded through me when I saw Jenna standing there in her angel costume. The light from the hallway spilled into the room, and that's when I saw it. The figure in the corner. A large man, or at least I assumed it was a man, was sitting there in the shadows, wearing one of those creepy horse masks. His body was still, but his chest heaved with every breath, making the mask look even more distorted. Jenna screamed when she saw him, and her scream snapped me out of my paralysis. The man bolted up and darted out of the room, blending into the crowd in the hallway. We both stood there for a moment, stunned, before Jenna grabbed my arm. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, her eyes wide with shock. I was still trying to process it myself. I don't know. I just woke up and heard him breathing. I was too scared to move. Jenna's face paled. "Oh my God, are you okay? Did he try to do anything to you?" I shook my head, my mind still racing. "I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I woke up before he could do anything." Jenna looked like she was about to cry. "I'm so sorry. One of the guys who owns the house said we should bring you in here when you passed out. I went to get you some water, but I got caught up talking to someone. I didn't think you'd be alone for long." I sat up, my head spinning, not just from the alcohol, but from the shock of what just happened. "How long was I in here?" "Maybe 20 minutes, Jenna said. That guy must have snuck in here while I was gone. I didn't think anyone would even notice you were in here." I glanced around the room again, the reality of how close I might have been to something terrible sinking in. My chest felt tight as I tried to calm my breathing. "Let's just go. I don't want to stay here any longer." Jenna nodded, and we left the room, trying to blend into the sea of partygoers, like nothing had happened. But in the back of my mind, all I could think about was the man in the horse mask. How long had he been watching me before I woke up? What would have happened if Jenna hadn't come back when she did? On the ride home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I always thought my dad was being overprotective when he warned me about drinking. Now, after tonight, I knew why he didn't want me to. I had learned my lesson the hard way. Halloween in my small town was never about trick-or-treating door to door. Instead, we had something called trunk or treat at the local church. Everyone in the community would pull into the parking lot, decorate their cars with spooky themes, and hand out candy from their trunks. The church turned it into a big event with costume contests, games, and even a bouncy house for the younger kids. It was all fun, but by the time I turned 11, it had started to feel a little too childish for me. That year, I wasn't really interested in running around collecting candy like the younger kids. So, I decided to stick with my mom and help her pass out treats instead. It wasn't the most exciting job, but I didn't mind, especially since my mom had brought along all my favorite candy. About halfway through the night, as I sat next to our car, watching the little kids run from trunk to trunk, a group of high schoolers walked over. I recognized them from around town. They were the kind of guys who always seemed too cool for anything. They were laughing and joking with each other, and when they saw me sitting there, one of them, Josh, spoke up. "Hey man, heard there's this old shed out in the woods we're gonna go check out. You wanna come?" I couldn't believe it. These were the kids I always looked up to, the ones who seemed like they had it all figured out. Of course I wanted to go. "Mom, can I go with them?" I asked, trying to play it cool. She gave me a once-over, a little hesitant at first, but when she saw I was excited, she waved me off with a smile. Just be back in time for the costume contest. I followed the high schoolers as they led me out of the parking lot and into the woods that bordered the church. We walked for what felt like forever, but it was probably only 15 minutes. Sure enough, tucked deep in the woods was the shed. It was bigger than I expected, almost the size of a garage, with a couple of rooms inside. We stepped in cautiously, the old wooden door creaking as we entered. The place was a mess, filled with old furniture and broken down tools. but it had a creepy vibe that made the whole adventure feel thrilling. We were poking around for a few minutes when suddenly, the sound of a chainsaw roared to life outside. My heart leapt into my throat. One of the high schoolers started laughing nervously, but before anyone could say anything, a voice bellowed from outside, "Come on out, and no one gets hurt." Panic set in. My mind immediately went to the horror movies I'd snuck into watching, particularly Friday the 13th. Jason and his hockey mask, the chainsaw, it all lined up too perfectly. Without thinking, we bolted for the back door. The high schoolers were faster than me. They took off, leaving me trailing behind. I tried to keep up, but I could hear the chainsaw getting closer and closer. My heart pounded, and before I knew it, I tripped over a branch and fell hard onto the ground. When I rolled over, I saw him. The chainsaw man, standing over me, wearing a hockey mask just like Jason's. He was holding the chainsaw, revving it as if ready to strike. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes as I lay there, terrified. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling, "let me go." He raised the chainsaw over his head, and I shut my eyes, bracing for the worst. But instead of the roar of the chainsaw coming down, I heard laughter. I opened my eyes to see the chainsaw man turning off the saw and pulling off the mask, revealing Josh's older brother, Robbie, underneath. He was doubled over, laughing, and the other high schoolers came out from behind the trees, joining in on the joke. "You should have seen your face, man," one of them said between laughs. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but at the same time, I couldn't help but laugh too. It was all just a prank, a stupid, terrifying prank. But now that it was over, I had to admit, it was kind of funny. They helped me up and we started walking back to the parking lot. The whole way, they gave me a hard time about how scared I looked, but in a weird way, I felt like I'd earned their respect. When we got back to the church, they even bought me a soda from the concession stand, still teasing me, but in that way that felt more like acceptance than anything else. Looking back, that might have been the most terrifying moment of my life at the time, but it's also how I got my in with the older kids. I may have been scared out of my mind, but in the end, it was worth it. I'd do it all over again if I had to. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be reminded when we post a new video every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email it to us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story featured in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.